Good morning. My name is Alex Johnston. I'm the CEO of CONCAN, the Connecticut Coalition for Achievement Now, and we are a statewide education reform advocacy organization working to ensure great public schools for every student in the state. And we're here today to talk about one of the most important issues facing cities and towns across the state that are trying to maintain quality schools in an atmosphere of budget cutbacks and spending reductions. And these are districts that are trying to keep the best teachers that they have in classrooms in front of kids, even when there are layoffs, unavoidable layoffs because of budget shortfalls. And so the issue that we have here is that this year in Connecticut, there have already been hundreds of layoff notices issued to teachers across the state. And unfortunately, hundreds of teachers will very likely lose their teaching positions because of those cutbacks. But what is doubly unfortunate is that those layoffs, in the vast majority of districts, are going to be guided by a policy of last in, first out. Layoff decisions made primarily or solely on the basis of seniority. And that means that the newest teachers will be the first to go, regardless of their performance. And clearly, experience counts, and it should be considered in the teaching profession as in any other. But what we are proposing is a change in state policy. We're asking state legislators to make that change so that we can have a layoff policy that takes into consideration other factors. For example, we all know that teachers are unique individuals with unique attributes and unique skills. Yet the current policy of last in, first out doesn't recognize that at all. We have a number of districts in the state where when it comes to a layoff decision, and we have two teachers who were hired on the same date and therefore have the same seniority, the tie-breaking factor is the last 4 digits of their Social Security number. Surely there's other data that we have, objective data that we can use, other than a number that was assigned to people randomly at birth, to figure out which teacher should stay and which teacher should go in the unfortunate circumstance when we have to do layoffs. So treating all teachers as if they are the same, except for the amount of time they spent in the classroom, really doesn't make sense. We should be doing everything we can to keep the best teachers in the classroom. And in a situation where we have hundreds of teachers across the state who are in a category, they've been ranked through the existing evaluation system, and they are in need of improvement. They've had the opportunity to grieve that. We believe at CONCAN, and we're certainly advancing this policy, that those folks should be subject to layoffs before others. We should also be looking at programs and special programs, special training, and looking at that as a factor before we make layoffs across the board and bump people all across different schools. So this is a really serious problem this year, as we're seeing hundreds of layoffs. This is a problem that's going to get even worse next year. As you'll hear from some of the folks who are running school districts who are up here with me today, all the one-time federal money, all that help is running out. This is really the last year of any extra funding, and we have continued flat funding at the state level. So districts that are barely scraping by this year are really going to be facing a challenge next year, and that's why it's especially important that the legislature take action before June 8th at the end of the session. So we have been working to raise attention to this issue at CONCAN. We're working with other organizations. And joining me today in this effort are school administrators, parents who are on the front line of our education system. And their stories really demonstrate how broken and damaging the current layoff policy of last in, first out is. So I have up here with me today Dr. Stephen Tracy, who's the superintendent of Derby Public Schools, Dr. Sonia Magnon, who's a parent of students in Hartford and Middletown and a member of the Latino and Puerto Rican Affairs Commission. We have Nili Arseniegas, who's a Hartford parent and director of the Hartford Parent Organizing Council. We have Doreen Richardson, who is a member of the Windsor Board of Education, and Dr. Stephen Adamowski, who is the superintendent of the Hartford Public Schools. And I'm going to turn it over to them, and I'll... Yep. We're here today to talk about one of the most important issues facing the state, which is the prospect of teacher layoffs in an environment of budget cutbacks. We're going to see hundreds of teacher layoffs this year across the state, and if we don't do something to change policy at the state level, those layoffs will be conducted using an existing policy, last in, first out, meaning that the last teachers hired will be the first teachers let go, no matter what. And we don't think that makes sense. We think there are other ways to distinguish between teachers based on the quality of their work. And we are supporting a policy change. We're asking state legislators to do the same. And here with me today are a number of folks who can talk with you about that, school district leaders as well as parents and advocates. So I'm going to turn it over to them, and then I'll conclude with some remarks. But Stephen Tracy, why don't you step up?
Thanks, Alex. Good morning. My name is Stephen Tracy. I'm the superintendent of schools in Derby, Connecticut. And like many of my colleagues this spring, we've had the unfortunate experience of delivering layoff warnings to our non-tenured teachers. Derby may be unique this year in that one of those non-renewal letters went to our Teacher of the Year for 2011, a remarkable young woman whose impact and value to our city is obvious, not just in our CMT scores, but in the faces of the young people that she inspires every day. As Alex said, none of us enjoy being in the teacher layoff business. But at a time when boards of education and school leaders are being called upon to get better results for kids with limited resources, the current system simply makes no sense. We've got to find a way to factor in teacher performance to the layoff process. And that's what we're here today calling on the General Assembly to do. Thank you.
Thank you. And Dr. Magnon.
Good morning. My name is Dr. Sonia Magnon. I'm on the Latino Puerto Rican Affairs Commission. I'm also the vice president at Wesleyan University in Middletown. But most importantly, I'm a parent of two students, one in Middletown and one in Hartford. And what this act will do, last in, first out, is really not give our new teachers the opportunity to do the incredible work that they've been doing. At McDonough Elementary School in Middletown, where my 10-year-old son is in the 4th grade, we've seen tremendous turnaround in the last 3 years in terms of the test scores, the CMT scores, in that school, which was at one time one of the worst performing schools in the town of Middletown. Now, when you disaggregate the scores, you see that low-income African-American and Latino students' test scores are amongst the best test scores in Middletown, and that's attributed to a principal that has dedicated his time in choosing young, energetic, amazing teachers that are new in the district and that are really turning things around. So if we don't start looking at the achievement gap in the state, if we don't start taking really seriously the education of our children, low-income children, children of color in the state, then we're going to be paying for it at the back end. You know, we're investing a lot of money in getting people out of trouble as adults, and we need to take that money and invest it in our children's education at the bottom end. Thank you.
Thank you. Millie Arseniegas.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Millie Arseniegas, and I am a parent in Hartford and the president of the Hartford Parent Organization Council, a coalition of 45 PTOs throughout Hartford Public Schools. As a parent in Hartford, I have seen the harmful effect of last in, first out firsthand. Hartford Reform Program, which has shown significant gains, relies on maintaining the efforts made in each unique school. But last in, first out requires bumping of teachers across schools, so we go backwards when this happens because teachers who are committed to a particular school are bumped into a different school, and so it goes throughout the district. Parents are working every day with their teachers, principals, and the district to sustain the reform. But now we need the legislator to take corrective action and help us keep the teachers in whom we have already invested millions of dollars on professional development and specialized training. We are in a state of urgency, and we can no longer continue the status quo for one day longer. Our children have shown results and deserve our best efforts to allow them to continue to succeed. I hope the legislators will hear our calls today and put an end to the last in, first out this year and not wait till next year. This needs to happen this year. We need to start being proactive instead of reactive. And I think that parents have shown in Hartford that they're involved more so now than ever. Teachers are doing their best in the classroom, and we need to, other than just this last in, first out, we need to give those teachers credit for all of their hard work, because that is what they show our children, right? With hard work, you will succeed. So we need to do the same thing for our teachers. Thank you.
Doreen Richardson of the Windsor Board of Education.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Doreen Richardson. I serve on the Windsor Board of Education. The time to place children at the center of the educational process is now. The time to end policies that place adults and the interests of adults over children, those policies need to be ended now. We call today for the end of the policy in particular known as last in, first out. I offer you 3 simple reasons why we need to end this policy. First, last in, first out restores children to their rightful place in education. It puts children first. Critical decisions such as who teaches our children, who leads our schools, must be based on a comprehensive measure of performance, not how long one has worked in the system. Second, last in, first out is a form of ageism. It unfairly discriminates against younger teachers. It sends the message that regardless of your training, your education, how hard you work, and the impact you have in the classroom, when budgets get tough, you will lose your job. Third, last in, first out is a policy that results in the abuse and misuse of taxpayer dollars. It forces boards of education, school administrators and principals to continue to expend resources on staff they know are less effective than teachers who will be given a pink slip this spring, simply because they have less years of service. We must fully restore equity, integrity, and confidence in our public schools. Eliminating policies like last in, first out takes us well on our way to doing just that. Thank you.
We also have the superintendent of the Hartford Public Schools, Dr. Stephen Adamowski, and he's been joined by Christina Kishimoto.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Stephen Adamowski, Superintendent of Schools of the Hartford System of Schools. With me today in support of this endeavor is Dr. Christina Kishimoto, who's my successor and superintendent designate. You are aware that Hartford has received quite a bit of attention on the last in, first out, also known as quality blind seniority issue, because the effect of this policy on Hartford and district like ours is so incredibly damaging. Since 2006, our reform has centered on the development of a portfolio of highly specialized themed schools of choice. We have undertaken concerted reform efforts that rely on being able to close the school experience, or students to be able to choose the school experience that's right for them, and to build communities of staff in those schools that are committed to the school's model, qualified to teach a particular content area, and trained, in many cases, over a period of multiple years in that particular model or pedagogy. We are the most improved city in our state. And have done the most, I think, of any Connecticut school district to close the state's largest in the nation achievement gap. But this is a very destabilizing element that is impeding our reform at this point. One thing that many people don't realize is that when layoffs are needed, they create a wave of bumping. Teachers actually move through the system from school to school until the newest teachers are let go. Again, regardless of their experience, commitment to the school, the qualifications that they had when they are hired. You can imagine how disruptive this is in a place like Hartford, where so many of our teachers have to undergo specialized training in particular areas to work in a specialized school. So they've made commitments, and these are school models that they have chosen and are committed to and are interested in. In Hartford, we have been engaged in this issue for some time. We have asked the State Board of Education to intervene and permit building-based seniority or layoffs based upon building seniority rather than district seniority, so you don't have people bumping into the schools. We've attempted to bargain for this flexibility with the Hartford Teachers Union. This issue has even gone to arbitration, and none of these efforts have been successful in our land of steady habits because the laws are stacked in its favor. National studies have shown that poor and minority students suffer a disproportionate impact from quality blind seniority or first in, first out legislation. In my view, this is one of the greatest civil rights issues of our time. Every student has a right to the most qualified teacher available, and not simply the one that is most senior. We hope that the legislature will respond to this issue, problem, this injustice. This may have been a policy that served our state well years and years ago, when teachers were interchangeable parts, when there was no reduction of personnel, when schools were not specialized, when we did not have magnets, regional choice. But it is not a policy that fits Connecticut anymore or serves our students anymore. Thank you.
So I'm just going to quickly wrap up, and then we'd be happy to take questions. So what we're asking for here is a long-term solution to change the approach to teacher evaluation in this state so that we have rigorous, comprehensive teacher evaluations and school leader evaluations that distinguish teachers and school leaders on the basis of their performance. What we're asking for right away before the end of this legislative session is legislative action to change this policy of last in, first out, so that districts that are forced to make layoffs can do so first looking at the pool of people who've already been designated by the existing evaluation system as chronically in need of improvement, people who've had already an opportunity to grieve and who are acknowledged to be severely underperforming. And there are hundreds of people in that category across the state. We are also asking that districts be given the flexibility to do layoffs within buildings or programs so that we don't have district-wide layoffs based on seniority where we see bumping all across a district, which is hugely disruptive for students, teachers, and everyone concerned. So, you know, a lot of folks like to say that it makes sense to lay off teachers based on seniority, you know, using like a medical analogy, that if you needed surgery, you'd want to go to the most experienced surgeon who'd been serving for 20 years and not sort of a new intern who just walked in the door. That may be the case when it comes to surgery, but it's important to remember that people who are working in hospitals, surgeons, have to go through an incredibly rigorous training process, and they're held accountable for results in an open and transparent way every day. No such rigorous evaluation and transparency process exists right now for the performance of our teachers. And we need to create one, and we need to take action immediately so that we can avoid the worst consequences of the layoffs that are inevitably coming this year and the more layoffs that are coming next year. So we're calling on legislators to take action before June 8th to end this policy of last in, first out. Thank you. We'd be happy to take any questions.
You don't have there is no formal bill right now. Is that my understanding that you would try to do this by amendment?
That's
isn't
right.
it a little late in the legislative game, considering their full plate and the controversial nature of this issue, to be asking for this?
Well, let's be clear. I think ConCan and others have been advocating for this change since before the legislative session got underway. The Education Committee has had an opportunity to consider this. They chose not to pass a bill out of committee that dealt with it. But I think those of us who've been around the legislative process understand that there is a lot of time between now and June 8th, and that huge issues get worked on at the last minute. Just last night, the DREAM Act finally passed in the state of Connecticut. And if we can accomplish something like that in the last few weeks of the legislative session, surely we can find our way, see our way clear to take action to preserve great teachers in classrooms.
So do you have any lawmakers willing to put in an amendment to do this?
We certainly expect that we'll be working with legislators, and we wouldn't be here today if we didn't think there was a real possibility of passing this legislation.
One other question. Basically, this challenge is a sort of a basic tenet of labor. I mean, you have state employees who are in the same situation who, depending on what happens with the ratification process on their deal, could be facing layoffs in a bumping situation, et cetera. This is a legislature that's passed a lot of pro-labor bills this year. Do you really think they're going to turn around and do something like this?
We're focused on what makes sense for kids. And, you know, we have 570,000 kids in public schools in the state of Connecticut. And we have the largest achievement gap in the country. And as you've heard from other speakers, it is time that we put the interests of our children first and foremost in the policymaking process.
Certain teachers were concerned that if it was not as much based on seniority, that superintendents would cut those who were making more money. Is there any way to ensure that process if something like this is cut?
That's a very valid concern that teachers have raised, that, I put my time in and I'm a great teacher and I happen to have 20 years of experience and I don't want to be targeted for layoffs because I'm more expensive than somebody else. What we are proposing directly addresses that, because people who've been put into this chronic improvement status based on the existing evaluation system were placed in that status before this crisis arose and without any sort of favoritism or targeting of people based on the number of years that they've been teaching. So it is just not an issue to say, and I think we do have to be real, that there are certainly boards of education and superintendents who might be tempted, if they were given the freedom to do so, to solve a budget problem by laying off their most senior teachers. That would be hugely counterproductive. The whole point we're trying to make here is that seniority should not be the basis for layoffs one way or the other. We should be looking at quality.
Are you saying that there currently is no incentive for them to update their skills?
That there's no incentive for teachers to update their skills? Well, certainly in a situation where we have, in many cases, an evaluation system that's not based on student achievement growth, it's not based on classroom performance the way that it should be, there is less of an incentive than there should be. So if you look at the New Haven contract, where the New Haven Federation of Teachers and the school district have come up with an innovative approach, the evaluations there are based significantly on how students improve during the course of a school year. And that creates a great incentive for the district and the teachers to collaborate around professional development.
Why aren't you advocating that?
As I said, that is the long-term solution. But we have a crisis right now that needs to be solved right away, where we're going to be letting Teachers of the Year go. We're going to be keeping people who are documented to be underperforming chronically. That does not make sense.
But you're going to get, you're going to get enormous pushback from the labor unions. This, as somebody mentioned earlier, it's all on tradition that and this is a non-gender specific term, but the guys with the whiskers usually are the ones who are the most secure.
Well, the fact that the system works the way that it does is not a reason to keep it the way that it is. And that's why we're here advocating for change. You ask yourself, how did Connecticut end up with the worst achievement gap in the country? Here we are, a state with great resources.
That's all attributable to teachers. It's not attributable to population shifts and other things.
Yeah, I'm not suggesting that it's attributable to teachers. I'm suggesting it's attributable to state policy. We don't change state policy in Connecticut the way that other states have, and we are falling behind. This is exactly the kind of policy change that other states are making. 11 other states have already taken action on this. It's high time that we did the same.
What other states?
Let's see. You're going to test me here. Florida, Indiana, I believe Ohio, Colorado, Illinois, Tennessee. Let's see. Did I say Indiana? I'd be happy to get your list. Yeah.
Has this all been recent, or has
Rhode Island, yeah.
Has some of this been in existence for a number of years in those states?
These are all policies that have been enacted in the last 2 years. Last year, and this year.
You're saying there would be some sort of subjective judgment used by the superintendent in determining who was laid off.
Well, let's take on. Yeah.
Just a simple seniority.
I think what we're talking about in the proposal we're making for this year is to say that judgment has already taken place. There are hundreds of teachers across the state who have already been deemed through the existing evaluation system to be in this lowest performing status. They've had an opportunity to grieve that, and there's not a dispute about whether these teachers are underperforming. But those teachers are going to stay while Teachers of the Year with less experience are laid off. We think that needs to change right away. And over the longer term, we need to change the teacher evaluation system, the school leader evaluation system, so that we are really looking hard at performance and student achievement gains when we're evaluating teachers and principals.
Can I ask a question
Yeah.
of Superintendent Adamowski and
Sure.
incoming superintendent?
You've appealed to the State Board of Education to intervene in the situation in Hartford. Do you plan to ask them to intervene this year? I know you guys aren't facing major layoffs this year, but what's the status of that?
Well, as you point out, this year we were saved by the Obama's administration's teachers' jobs bill, which for us was an $11 million difference. However, during the period of the last 3 years, our staff has been reduced by 400 due to the state's fiscal crisis, and 200 of those have been teachers. And under the last in, first out policy, unfortunately, we lost many of the teachers who staffed our new redesigned schools. Next year, when the last of this stimulus money goes away, we will be back to a situation in which there will have to be reductions in staff. So the timing of doing this now is particularly important, and hopefully we would not come up to the last minute without having any alternative. And as has been pointed out by several of the questions, there are various approaches here. Our first approach was to propose a system of school-based seniority, was to honor seniority within schools. Another, Alex spoke to in some detail, is to link teacher evaluation to student performance, and then use that as one of the criteria for making reduction in force. And then there's also the issue of qualifications. There are teachers who are simply better qualified to teach in a particular school by virtue of training that they've had, degrees that they've earned in a particular content area, or other types of qualifications. I think there's room for all of this to be considered. Obviously, the best system would give school districts the most flexibility and prevent the subjectivity that has been raised as a fear.
I just want to add that we have taken steps over the last 2 years that have been significant to move towards this system of fairness in terms of looking at future quality. One is that we've moved to a school-based budget process, and our schools budget based on an average salary. And so whether a teacher is paid at the highest level or has an entry-level salary to the school, they are charged the same salary, an average salary. And that's to help with this decision-making. We also have reallocated a lot of our Title II dollars to provide additional training to teachers who wanted to seek theme-based training. So whether that's Montessori training, training in the breakthrough model, training in the National Academy Foundation, engineering, green technology. So there's a variety of very specific theme-based training that we provided to our teachers. We have quality teachers in the city of Hartford, but in any field, you're going to have some variation, and we need to be able to ensure that we have the highest quality teachers teaching our students.
If the legislature does not act, though, by June 8th, we plan to appeal to the State Board this year to step in for your situation that you said is going to happen next school year. Or sorry, not next school year, but
we anticipate returning to the State Board of Education at some point in time.
If New Haven and dozens of other communities have been able to negotiate so that this is not the primary factor in their layoffs, what is the impediment in a place like Hartford or Derby or Windsor that you can't also negotiate to that point, such as New Haven has?
I'd have to correct your statement. I believe the New Haven situation is unique in our state. There are not dozens of other communities.
But there are, according to the union, several dozen that don't have seniority as the primary factor.
There may, there are 169 school districts. Okay, there may be different ways of working this out in other very small districts. In the main, the vast majority of our school districts in Connecticut have contracts that were negotiated years and years ago using last in, first out and quality blind seniority. And as I said, they were negotiated and appropriate at a different point in time, when teachers were viewed as interchangeable parts, when we were not in a standards-based system of accountability, when no one knew Connecticut had the greatest achievement gap in the nation because it was not being measured, and school reform efforts to create better schools were not the focus that they are today.
What's been the reception when you brought that up as a negotiating point?
Well, I think our union, as well as the majority of unions throughout the state, teachers unions I'm referring to here, have been against it as a matter of principle.
Dr. Tracy, the same thing. How has that been? Have you brought that up
And negotiation?
We're in the middle of a 3-year contract now with our Teachers Association, so this topic will not come up at least for another 18 months with us. And as Dr. Adamowski stated, we understand that unions tend to have a great deal of difficulty with this, and so it's a challenge, particularly when there are other issues on the table and you're also facing binding arbitration on the other side of it. So this is not an issue currently in the Derby contract, and it won't come open for at least another year and a half. Sure.
If you're not going to base the layoff decisions on seniority, what factors would you base that on short of that being?
Well, I think you've heard a lot of ideas here today that are a blend of professional judgment, and by the way, we all as educators have to make judgments about quality performance. Teachers do that all the time. As a parent, I'm sure you wouldn't be happy if report card grades were given out on the basis of birthdays. You'd say, make a judgment. I know it's hard, but we're paying you to make distinctions between high quality and otherwise. So that ought to be part of it. The notion of not having teachers bumping across schools and disrupting programs that have been built on training over the years makes a lot of sense. And then using the results of evaluation procedures that have already been accepted. So there are a variety of methods that I think can protect us from the kinds of abuses that none of us want to see, namely targeting people because they are senior. We want to be looking at quality because, as I said in my remarks earlier, we're under tremendous pressure, school leaders and school boards, to get better results for kids with very limited budgets. And if we have to turn a blind eye to who's most effective in the classroom, that really ties our hands.
The teacher here that you mentioned, what subject does she teach? When's her last day?
Well, first of all, she happens to be a math teacher, and we are still in the final weeks of the budget process in Derby, so we're all working very hard to minimize layoffs. We don't want to be in the layoff business, particularly the teacher layoff business, but that process will unfold over the next couple of weeks. She happens to be a math teacher and a remarkable one. You can see it, as I said before, in the test scores, in the enthusiasm of her kids, and the energy that she brings to the classroom, and the fact that she's only been here 3 years shouldn't work against her.
How many teacher layoffs are you all looking at this point?
Not sure. We just got our bottom line budget from the city last night, and I haven't even been back to the office since then. So we're a small district. We only enroll about 1,500 youngsters. The school board's budget that we proposed before the city got involved in reducing it did include the elimination of 4 teaching positions. We need to deal with several $100,000 of additional reductions, and we'll see where it goes. But we're trying to manage this, protecting teachers and especially protecting our highest quality teachers. That often means cutting something else like maintenance, technology, curriculum, professional development, but that's a different story.
If the legislature doesn't act, do you plan to appeal to the State Board of Education for action?
We haven't considered that. I think our effort right now, working with ConCan, is to see if we can't get the General Assembly to do the right thing. If that doesn't happen, any layoffs that we have to deal with now will be upon us. I'm sure that whatever process might unfold after that would be useful maybe for next year, which we all think is going to be worse. But right now we're focused on stretching the dollars that we've got as far as we can and hanging on to as many great teachers as we're able to.
This Teacher of the Year, she received a non-renewal notice earlier this year. And how many non-renewals did you issue?
We issued about 25 non-renewals, and that occasionally gets done in districts where you're facing budget uncertainty and you're facing an April 1 deadline under the Tenure Act, where it's to the school board's advantage to let people know before rather than after. Then you work as hard as you can throughout the budget season to try to minimize the need to do that. So all of the non-tenured folks in Derby got a notice of non-renewal that was adopted by the school board back in March.
Grace, did you have a question?
Yeah, I did. As you know, this legislation was already killed, and that would have proposed this. And legislators are saying we really should get an evaluation system set up first. And there is a group working on that, a statewide group, so that's what layoffs decisions could be made on. Why not wait until then? I mean, what kind of evaluation system would you use, and would that be fair?
So as we've said, the long-term solution, I think we all agree, is having an effective evaluation system statewide that focuses on student achievement growth as a significant factor, and it links teacher evaluations with the learning of their students. That way, when you come time to have to do layoffs, you understand who's performing well and who's not. And you end in that process a layoff policy based on seniority. So that clearly is a long-term solution. But what we're talking about today is the fact that the existing evaluation system has already identified hundreds of teachers who are in a chronic improvement status that clearly designates them. And they've, in fact, had the opportunity to appeal that. Those teachers will stay absent legislative action, and Teachers of the Year and others will be laid off. And given where we are as a state and the efforts of so many of our districts, we're starting to see real signs of progress. It does not make sense to continue that policy in the short term. And the legislature can do something about it if they act before June 8th.
What is a chronic improvement process? What do you mean? Is that like, does every school system have that kind of evaluation?
Yes, that's laid out in statute. That's the lowest category of evaluation. And teachers have due process rights when they're notified they're in that status. And if they continue in that status, that can ultimately lead to termination for incompetence. And the point is, why would we not begin layoffs with that pool of teachers, and instead of just looking blindly at seniority, when we know that when we do that, we're going to be letting some incredibly effective teachers go.
This issue has been brought up year after year. What's to make anyone think that it has a chance this year?
We have a crisis. We have a crisis. And, I would ask that question of legislators. When are we going to take action? Here we are, with the worst achievement gap in the country, with district leaders, teachers, principals who are actively doing something about it. We've got schools like the McDonough School, where Dr. Magnon's children attend. They have turned things around. John Romeo, the principal there, has assembled a group of teachers. They're doing phenomenal work. And you can see it in the results academically. You can see it when you walk in that school. It's an exciting, vibrant place to be. You can see how they've engaged the community. The average teacher experience in that school is 6 or 7 years less than the district average. So when you have seniority-based layoffs, you end up concentrating layoffs in precisely the places that have had the most dynamic turnaround. There's a similar school in Bridgeport, which has doubled achievement for African American and Hispanic students in the last few years, and where the average experience of teachers is, again, 6 or 7 years less than the district. And so this is a terrible problem, and it's happening across the country. I mean, if you've been following the news in LA, there was a school which, because it had a concentration of less experienced teachers, effectively had to lay off 75% of its staff. And the California Supreme Court has found that unconstitutional because of its disparate impact on low-income students.
This didn't happen a couple of years ago when there was Race to the Top money hanging as a carrot for the legislature to take it up. Can you characterize why it didn't happen then? And then I guess this should have come before the previous question of why do you think you have a better chance now?
So last year, the state took some steps to try to become competitive for Race to the Top, and CONCAN and others pushed for stronger legislation than what was ultimately enacted. We took a step in creating a requirement statewide to be implemented several years from now that would require every district to link student achievement growth with its teacher evaluation process. But we took our sweet time in setting up that system. Other states moved much faster. Other states were ahead of us to begin with, and we did not act as boldly as we could have. Why do we think we have a better opportunity now? We believe that people in this state, if you ask the general public, and there's a poll up on our website, something like 90% of people, registered voters in the state, think that ending this policy makes perfect sense. And we believe that legislators make policy based on their examination of the facts and the data and their political calculations. And we want to make sure that people have access to the information and that they're hearing from their constituents. That's what advocacy is. We believe that this change makes sense for kids, and we're going to push for it. Thank you all.
Nicely done.
Good job. Thank you.